Resident Evil 4 Remake came out the 24th of March 2023, but we're next for the series. Well, to answer that question, I brought in Resident Evil aficionado, Jared from Avalanche Reviews. Jared, welcome. The king of Resident Evil.
I deserved every bit of that.
Absolute pleasure to have you. Absolute pleasure. And audience, you may be thinking, oh, Davey, are you trying to do an impression of Jared with your voice? No, I've just gotten over flu, and so my voice might be sounding a little bit raspier than normal. But I promise it's not trying to come out more manly than Jared. I think no matter, even with like 10 times like a Kaioken level flu, I don't think I'm ever gonna match that level of manliness that drips from that.
It sounds good. If it makes you feel any better, you're sounding good, dude.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. I'll take that. Thank you ever so much. But yeah, as I alluded to at the start, Resident Evil, we've gone through a big shake-up over the last few years. So I say the last few years. Ever since we had 6 came out and it just completely crashed the series down. We had Capcom kind of running apologies, and all the fan base was wondering, what was next? Is this the end of the series? Is there no return for this? We had 7, which then brought everything kind of right back on track and sold us on what the series could be in kind of returning to this kind of its horror roots, and it's very much like, even though it was in first person, it was very much in line with, say, RE1 than kind of anything else, or as far as I'm concerned it is. And then from there, we've kind of gone from, in a way, strength to strength, but with certainly a couple of dips here and there since then. Obviously, we've had RE2 Remake, we've had RE3 Remake, RE8, and now RE4 Remake. So in terms of the state of Resident Evil right now at this moment, how are you feeling about where we are, Jared? Are you quite happy with what we've been having since this whole kind of turnaround since 7?
So, I am happy, but I will say Resident Evil is on more shaky ground than might be immediately obvious. On one end, we have the remakes, which, even with RE3 sort of bringing the average down, I would say the remakes have been killing it lately. Even aspects of RE3 Remake that people didn't like, there are parts of it that they enjoyed. And, RE2 Remake, people super enjoyed. RE4 Remake seems to be just overall a positive with everybody. So they're heading in a really good direction as far as the remakes go, in my opinion. But the main numbered entries, I think, feel like a little lost. You had RE7, which, it made headlines for, like you said, returning to sort of series dogma. You're doing the same stuff that you're doing in RE1, which is exactly what I wanted, by the way. I didn't even believe the reviews that said that, because at the time I refused to play RE7 because I was like, this is too far gone. There's no way this is going to be what I like. You got me with RE6. You're not doing it again. So when I ended up playing it, I was like, I am blown away that a first-person shooter could play this much like a Resident Evil game. And even though I think it's probably a little further away from survival horror gameplay than most people would agree, it's so close to survival horror gameplay that I could see why anybody would think that, right? So it's good enough that I give it a huge thumbs up, and it really did try to embrace that more slower-paced, exploration-based horror that made the series so good. And then 8 came out. And I don't think, I enjoyed 8 a lot, but I don't think anybody could argue that 8 had almost anything in common with 7. It seems as if maybe Capcom is speedrunning the Resident Evil cycle, which is like it starts out slower, more methodical horror, and then eventually after release becomes this mega action, fast-paced, shot of adrenaline. You get your popcorn and you're there for a second. There's explosions everywhere. RE8 seemed to, in one game, head from RE1 to RE6. And when I covered RE8, my opinion is this is not a bad game yet. But I could see a lot of the stuff going on in RE8 becoming like, for example, take from RE4 to RE5, you could see what Capcom was really focusing on. You had the quick time events, the over-the-shoulder shooting, the set-piece heavy stuff, and the action emphasis. Now, take RE8 and imagine them applying that same sort of overzealous overcorrection to RE9, say. I could see things getting kind of bad, honestly.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, for me, the way I think about it, when I think about 7 and then 8, right? Like, I think when I did my reviews on 7 and 8, I said that with 8, it's the first sequel we've ever had in Resident Evil. Like, first true sequel. Because, sure, you get, like, 2 as a follow-up to 1. Yes. The events happen after and they're connected. Yes. 3 and 1 with Jill Valentine, yeah, her story carries on. Code Veronica and 2, yeah, I guess we're clear, right? But it's not like as if the story really matters, like really, to the story that takes place in CV. Like, say what happens in CV, you could miss 2, and really, you don't really care too much. It's a Resident Evil story, right? They're not that in depth. I know there's a lot there if you want it, but it's not really. It's a B movie thing, right? Whereas with 7 and 8, it's like a really kind of tight story about just Ethan Winters and his family, right? It's a self-contained story in those 2 games. And for me, I felt like the dial-up on it was the same way that like Leon's dial-up from 2 to 4 in terms of just that action, piece. And a Village to me felt like Resident Evil 4. It felt like just that step into Resident Evil 4 kind of territory rather than 6. Yeah. I mean, it's got.
I would say as far as its like its foundational elements go, they were probably copying Resident Evil 4 or using it as a heavy inspiration for most of, for example, like let's say the order of the events that take place, or Resident Evil 4's sort of how you'll have high octane intense action and then, you know, maybe 20 minutes of exploration with like no background music, just ambient sounds and stuff. RE8 did the same thing. You're stuck in a village. The villagers are after you. There's an evil cult style thing. So yeah, you're definitely right. RE8 looked at RE4 and said, how could we do that but in first person?
Yes, exactly right. Now, you mentioned on something that I see quite a lot of the fans on like Facebook and stuff like that seem to go on, or seem to mention quite a bit as well. This kind of belief that Resident Evil kind of goes in like a wave almost, where you have like generally 3 entries, and then it moves on to like the next kind of wave. Like you have the classic kind of trilogy, which they say is a wave, and then it goes into the action series with like 4, 5, and 6, and then they're expecting it to be like 7, 8, and 9 for it to like tie off into whatever this whole series is. Do you kind of buy into that, or do you feel that it's very much a case of 9 is now a fresh start, go wherever it kind of feels like?
I think we're probably more likely to see that cycle take place again. The 7, 8, 9 will essentially be very similar to your REs 1, 2, 3, your 4, 5, and 6. And I think the reason why it happens is not necessarily like a conscious effort on Capcom's part, but more like Capcom tends to listen to what fans enjoyed about the previous entry and then include way too much of that into the next one. So let's take RE4. Fans were like, yeah, I mean, QTEs, they were fun, they were innovative at the time, and every video game review at the moment, and magazines and stuff, and even on like GameTrailers.com, they were all like, yeah, QTEs, this is it, this is killer. It was so fun, everybody was really into them. And then you get RE5 where it's like, well, it's a lot more QTEs, and then RE6 where it's like, this is way too many QTEs. Like if Mercedes put out a car last year and it had a really good engine, people are like, we really like that engine. And then this year they put out that same car, but it's got 2 of those engines. It's superfluous and it doesn't matter, and it's probably too much, but it's a huge overcorrection. And I think that's what Capcom does. And the cycle is them realizing that they have gone too far. It's like, okay, we need a reset. We need an RE7. We need an RE4. Whatever we're doing, we have included too much of what people like, and now we cannot back down from this. We just have to throw everything in the bin and start over.
It's an interesting thing. I mean, we got a little while. I imagine it's going to be another year before we kind of hear anything about RE9, I guess. I can't imagine we'll hear anything this year. I imagine the only thing we're going to get this year is going to be the Separate Ways DLC for 4. And then after that, I imagine, next kind of February, March time, I imagine we'll start seeing first kind of rumblings for RE9, I assume. But it could be that it's a few more years after that. But I'm sure that most you guys watching this right now know Jared and know his work. If for any reason you don't, he's the biggest influencer for why I decided to go in and start reviewing games myself. Absolute
thank you. Hell yeah.
King of the Resident Evil genre, as far as I'm concerned. And even though he's got some dodgy takes when it comes to Resident Evil 0 and his adoration for it, which I certainly do not agree with, that there's too many things that he's right about that I can't hold him against it. But you can find links to all Jared's channel in the description for this, and I'll have a link that will be on screen right now at this moment as well. But yeah, Jared, on your recent review you did for Resident Evil 4 Remake, you spent quite a bit of time on that, talking about the RE engine, and it's something that I noticed in my review as well. And I was saying that that the RE engine is looking a little bit tired at this point.
Yeah.
And I think it's about time that they kind of go back to the drawing board and just spend some time on just remodeling this engine, or just take it back to basics. Now, I'm very much not a technical head, right? When it comes to like even PC mastery, I had my mate the other day give me a call to talk me through how to zoom in on a keyboard, right? Because I didn't know how to do it, right? I'm a console guy to the core, right? I'm totally useless at all this stuff. When I was looking at it, I was playing on a PlayStation 5 for my review of RE4. The water effects were terrible. The ray tracing was just non-existent, really, not in any way that I'd really like ray tracing. And the hair has just never seemed right on the RE engine, not for a while anyway, especially since the Shadow of Rose DLC, which really stood out to me, and I was like, oh Jesus, this hair is diabolical.
Yeah. There's like literal strings coming out. Very odd.
Terrible, absolutely terrible. Do you think that they could just touch this engine up and make it better, or do you think they have to kind of go nuclear and just wipe this off and just come back with something shiny and new?
Now, I do tend to be a technical head myself, but I won't claim to know enough about how video game engines work that I could give you too much information one way or the other. But I would assume that there are things that could be done to spruce up RE engine. I think one of the biggest problems with it is that the engine was created before the concept of ray tracing was something that people could really do. And it's had a very messy implementation so far. Anybody who's turned on RE2 Remake on PC, or I think they actually pushed the update out to PS5 as well, ray tracing in that game kills performance, and oftentimes it breaks certain effects that pre-existed. So I feel like a game that will start development now will be much more comfortable with ray tracing, because even RE4 Remake was in development for a long time, and I would say only in the last 2 years has ray tracing become something that people outside of, top tier graphics cards owners could actually make use of in a normal video game. And even now, it's rough. You have to use like dynamic image scaling, like DLSS or FSR. But I feel like a game that's starting development now could probably implement ray tracing a lot better than RE4 Remake did. And for all we know, Capcom might not understand RTX very well and how to implement it into their engine. And I think if I was Capcom, I would be paying either outside consultants or people who coded RE engine. That would be their job right now, is to figure out how to properly insert ray tracing into this and have it work right. That being said, outside of just the lighting, texture resolution in RE4 Remake seems to be a big bugbear, and it's kind of been present since RE7 as well. And I'm thinking that maybe some of the good-looking graphics they were able to produce in RE7 probably came from a little bit of give and take. Like, okay, things might look better from afar, but when you get up close, maybe the resolution of the individual textures are relatively low, but if you put enough of them in a room, they give off a found footage sort of look, which RE7 did really well. I think maybe creating the engine for that, Capcom has been wanting to put as little money into remaking these games as humanly possible, because they're a company, and at the end of the day, they want to turn as big of a profit as they can.
Yeah.
RE2 Remake, I think when it first came out, was incredible, but I don't think RE4 Remake or even RE8 looks significantly better than RE2 Remake in any way. You might have better looking fog in RE4, but I would say probably face animations for Leon are much worse than they looked in RE2 Remake. So I think, honestly, as far as the texture resolution goes, that might be an issue with the engine, like a limitation, which is something I think that can be solved without rewriting an entire new game engine. But I really and truly, I think it comes down to effort and money, and Capcom probably found out during RE4, we can't get the same results out of the same budget. We're going to have to put some money into this time.
And I suppose the thing about it is, with the success that RE4 Remake has had, no surprise really. As soon as the reviews came out and it was, and it was ranking up so high, it was on then. At that point, you think, right, well, here we go. And I suppose it shines through for the game really that, for myself and for you, Jared, who've never been huge fans of RE4, to come out of the game and then think, actually, that was immense. It was really, really good. Is testament that graphics sure are important, right? And they're great, and presentation is a really important, key pillar. But it's not the be all end all. And if the gameplay is right, and if the gameplay is fun, then I suppose that's the biggest hurdle. So if you don't get that right, then no matter how good looking your game is, it's always going to be pretty tragic. I mean, just the recent example, of course, like Callisto Protocol. Did you ever play that?
I did.
Oh yeah.
And I'll be honest with you.
Don't tell me.
Sort of liked it.
Oh no. Oh,
I
Jared.
did, but I went in with zero expectations, and I didn't think it was going to be very good. And I didn't know what the gameplay would be like, because all I had seen was these like Dead Space style trailers.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is. Listen, when someone says I don't like Callisto Protocol, I'm like, yes, I get it. That being said, it's one of those situations where it's like something about the dodging and the countering. I have a section, I did a review on it, and I have a section where I talk about how I think a lot of people who didn't enjoy certain things, like, for example, the firearms that are in that game, people think are useless, but I think people were using them wrong, because they're essentially like combo extenders.
Yeah.
Like, you're not actually supposed to use them for offensive purposes. Like, if something's doing something to you across the map, you're better off going up and meleeing them, and then using the firearm to sort of reset your combo so you can stand them up again, than you would be to, say, shoot at them from across the room, which is the intuitive way to get it done.
Yeah.
So I think the game does not play into the way people want to play it very well, but there's something about it. I can't tell you why, but I enjoyed it.
That game. I played it through when it first came out. I played it through and I was like, oh, it's really challenging, right? I found it really, really challenging to start with. And after I got past kind of the halfway mark, I was fine then at that point. As soon as I figured out, how dodges work and how the super dodge works, like where you time it last second to get that extra like kind of parry window, whatever it is, can't remember now. You just get like some extra frames or something, so you can interrupt or whatever. And and I finished it and I thought I was okay. Flawed, wasn't great, wasn't that bad. And then I went back when they had the New Game Plus option for it, after they made a load of improvements. When they changed all the how quick it is now to heal and stuff like that. And I went back and oh my god, it was way worse, because they just made it super easy. They made it now that you ever played like the old school, like I say old school, it's not even old school really, but you play like the Arkham Batman games, right?
Yeah.
Well, in there, like people, you'll be fighting like a ton of people, and they're kind of all waiting to get their ass kicked, right? And you're like kind of dashing between them all fighting. Well, it's like that. You might have like 6 of them in a room, 6 like these mutants. And now instead of them coming and ganking you together, which is what they used to do, now they'll just stand there. And so you just go from one just going from like 1v1 to 1v1, 1v1. And it's really easy. You just dodge, beat, 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 shoot. And just kind of walk on your day. Yeah, shocking.
I think a better way to have handled that, because that was an issue at first, having, more than 3 guys in a room, you were just getting the absolute hell beat out of you. So I was, I remember saying in my video specifically, it's like, this game shines one-on-one. And I think what they did, they're like, oh, okay, so let's make it easier when there's a group and they won't all rush you. But maybe what you should have done is just have one enemy spawn in at a time. For whatever reason, you can contrive something. One crawls out from a sewer grate and then you fight him, and then another one drops from the ceiling, whatever it is. But I think having them all in the same room but choosing not to attack you definitely was not the method to solve.
They're like standing there like this. They're like they're ready to jump in. Just the next one. There's beat 'em ups on the Sega Genesis that's more realistic as far as AI behavior than that game. It's wild. Because there was a thing about that game that I did find interesting on my first run, was when there was a pack, it was about using your grip to be able to separate them out, right? To throw one like miles away or whatever, so that you can then beat the one before the other one comes back. And it was learning that. It was like a skill. And as soon as you learned that, then groups weren't too bad. And the skunk gun pistol was just insane. I think it just wiped out
what's actually kind of cool? Using the grip thing. Instead of using it to throw anybody, which was like a last resort for me when I figured this out, the grip is actually better to use as a reset as well. So you have the gun now and you have the grip. So let's say you do a 3-hit combo and you finish it with like a heavy attack that knocks them to the ground. If you use the grip thing, it'll stand them back up and you just let it go. You don't throw them. It just stands them back up again, but it leaves them open for a few frames for another 3 hits, then a heavy. But then if you shoot them with a gun before they hit the ground, they won't hit the ground. They'll stay stood up, another 3 hits and a heavy. So it's like, if you play fighting games, there's aspects of that game that I think you might have just unconsciously been like, oh, damn. Like when I figured it out, I was like, okay, I've been approaching this wrong. I was trying to play it like a survival horror game and conserve resources and stuff. And like the grip, the little usages you see like on the back of your neck or whatever, I'd be like, okay, I have to conserve this for when I want to throw people. And then I realized you can go into every fight, use everything you have, and you'll usually be fine at the end. When I figured that out, it made combat easier, yes, but like way more fun. And I went out of my way to engage in combat with everything. I didn't try to sneak or stealth or anything. I just wanted to fight everything in the game.
Oh, fair dues. Well, I'm glad, Jared, that we'll agree to disagree on Callisto, my friend. We certainly will. Although I'm hoping that for the DLC that we get some good stuff. But it was a bit of a segue that, because all I was saying really was that with Callisto, as far as I'm concerned, it looks amazing, but for me the gameplay didn't hit, and so that's where the presentation-wise isn't the biggest factor when it comes to overall game enjoyment, when it comes to, say, RE4 or anything like that. But yeah, so we're all kind of in agreement that they definitely will need to do some work when it comes to whatever the next Resident Evil project is, be that a remake or the next numbered entry, that they're going to definitely need to do some tweaks to the RE engine to get it up there with some of its competition, because it certainly wasn't looking too fresh for RE4 remake. So I suppose the big question is, where to next? Do you think it's going to be RE9, or do you think we may be going down another remake first?
I would assume. I think RE2 and RE3 remake being so close together was a very special situation, because RE2 and 3 remake were supposed to be a package deal at first when they were first being developed. So I think probably what we'll end up seeing is what we did recently, where a main numbered entry drops, then we see a remake. So I think 9 will be next, and then I honestly couldn't tell you what they'll remake next, because I think the current crop of games they have to remake seem either unrealistic or like untenable as far as like how I guess like aspects of society have kind of changed. Things that used to be okay or not even, used to be something that was just an element. For example, Code Veronica, having a main character who's insane but also like a cross-dresser. People would probably latch on to the cross-dressing part and try to draw an analog to modern stuff versus that story just literally being about someone who's insane and missing his sister so much he becomes her so that he could fill that void in his psyche. The way that people tend to look at nuance in video game stories nowadays, that probably doesn't bode well for Capcom. And ever since RE5, they probably don't want to eat that controversy again, which means they probably won't remake RE5, I would assume. So I don't know. I truly, whatever they announce for a remake next, it will be a massive surprise to me because I can't see them remaking any of it. Because RE1 remake, I don't know, that doesn't feel like that's something that they would focus on. It would be cool if they did, because we have the original RE1 remake and it's amazing and it's available on all modern platforms. So, no lose situation there. If the remake is bad, it changes nothing. So, I mean, it would be fine enough to see them do that, but it doesn't seem like something they would do. You could have Code Veronica, but then you have those issues, RE5, but then you have, the racial issues. Even at the time, this was, what was that, 2006? Somewhere in that neighborhood?
Yeah, something about that.
And, I would say most people would probably agree that was a time when offensive stuff was more okay. So, that was a huge controversy for Capcom. And, nowadays, I assume that would be multiplied. So they're probably staying away from that. And then after that, what do we have, 6? That feels like they're not touching that either.
It felt like such a reach, the time for 5, though. I gotta say, like, at the time, I still feel like it's such a huge reach. It's set in Africa, No wonder they're shooting black people. If everyone was white, that would be worse, surely, right? I think it's crazy.
If you go into RE5 with like a pre-established notion that that's what's going on, then you'll definitely see that. Because let's surface level, it is a white main character in a place shooting predominantly Africans. Although, to be fair, there were other races mixed in with your rogues gallery of enemies there. But realistically speaking, Africa seems like an incredible setting for a horror game, because to most of us, including the Japanese who worked on the game, I'm not familiar with things in Africa, and things that you're not familiar with, you're automatically, at the very least, like tentatively scared of, right? Like it's like,
yeah.
And then visually speaking, I thought it was honestly genius, and I think this was probably on purpose. In the Resident Evil games, you sort of have a tendency to rely on the dark because it's horror. And RE5 went the opposite way. It's like, what if the light was so bright and so just in your face? The shadows that it cast was sort of our darkness here. Like the dichotomy between the sun that was beating down so hard you could barely see when you walk out of one of these houses, and then, the HDR kicks in and you can't see anything. I feel like the abundance of light and the horror still being just as fresh was like a totally on purpose, on the nose. They're like, we're trying to change things up here. And I feel like it made such a good setting. It was so good. Like people are going to be sort of wary of you because you're different. You do not fit in. You're in a place where maybe you don't belong, right? So, that very first intro sequence of Chris just walking around and everybody eyeballing him and stuff, masterfully done. Like if the game was a little more subtle, that could have been the entire game right there, right? Like that feeling. But I think people who are prone to finding offense where none may exist looked at that and was like, this is Christmas come early.
Yeah.
This is a white main character shooting predominantly African people. And if you say that without any context, that does sound bad. But realistically speaking, if we start drawing arbitrary lines where it's like, well, this race cannot negatively interact with this race or racism shall exist, that feels to me like overcorrecting far too hard. And obviously the intent there is so that people aren't racist and so that things don't offend people of a racial nature, and I think that's a laudable goal. But when you go too far, it's like you can do the same thing where it's like, I want to be really healthy, and then you become so incredibly obsessed with your health that you become amazingly unhealthy. You don't eat the right foods, or you work out too much and your body's broken. We're probably doing the same thing with societal ills today, I would assume.
I think that's all really, really good points. And I suppose that's the thing, that no matter how well-intentioned your stuff is, anybody could twist anything any particular way. It's like there's a current outrage. There was that, well, I say current, it was like a week ago now, which is a long time for in the world of Outrage, because they just come and go so quick, don't they? But there was one recently on Horizon, because Aloy, the main character in Horizon, she kisses a girl at the end. And it's a choice for the player, by the way. So she doesn't have to, but the player can choose.
Right.
And so people are kicking off, saying like, oh, it's just been put in there just for the sake of it, and la 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 la. And it's like, oh, just what? Does this hurt anybody? No. It's a choice for the player at the end of the day. And if people want to do it, great. It stays true to the character, as she does anyway, so it makes sense. But I just think, like, why do people get so hung up on these things? It just makes... unless something was really abhorrent, or it was obviously racist or something, that's a different kettle of fish, If you had to go out and put up a bloody swastika and just, press a button to, throw up a salute or something, yeah, maybe we'll have issues with it. But if it's the case that you're just going out and just shooting some people because they're infected or whatever, I don't see what the issue is, but who knows? And you're right, things have only gotten worse. Things have only gotten more and more touchy. And you're right, 5, I hadn't thought about it in that way. 5 could be a bit of a disaster in that regard. Yeah, when I'm thinking about where they should go next, talk about remakes. 1, I'd never really want to see it kind of be redone. Even though...
I used to be in that camp. I used to be right there with you. But... thinking about what a good job they did, think about how you feel about RE2. And then remember when you first played RE2 Remake and you walked through the precinct and that one hallway where the stairs lead up and the zombie falls over the railing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of moments like that could be recreated from the Spencer Mansion. And I put my hands up because it's like, listen, we already have the perfect remake already. The worst they could do is totally bomb this one and I never touch it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose you're right. In terms of, I've got the remake there if I ever needed it. It's not going anywhere. It's perfect as is. And it's the same way that my favorite game of all time is Metal Gear Solid. The first Metal Gear Solid is my favorite game of all time. And I'm desperate to see it be remade. Will I ever think it would be better than my favorite game of all time, than the original? No, it probably never will be. But it doesn't matter, because I can always just go back. I can just boot up the PS1, chuck it in, and just have that great experience, right? So yeah, you're right. Maybe with RE1, if it gives me a chance to see spiders come back, because for some reason they've just forgotten they exist in all these remakes. I don't know why. If we can see, the spiders come back, if we can see hunters, we can see all these just awesome moments. Plant 42's fight, somehow if anyone can figure out how to fight that thing without getting hurt, would be a miracle. I don't know how the hell people do that on speedruns. I have no idea. I get sourced by that plant every time. So apparently there's
a corner in the room that you can stand that you're fine. Apparently. Tango Mushi on Twitter recently did it. And I was like, wait, this is possible? And then like a bunch of people in the replies were like, yeah, it's simple. You stand right here, you're good.
Oh my God, no way. I'd go into that with it's a proper slug match. Me and that plant.
Yes,
we're
exactly.
Just taking hits, shooting, taking hits, shooting. And that's all it is. But yeah, I'd love to see that. See the aqua ring and kind of all that stuff. It would be class. It would be great, and it would do what fans of like say RE4 have just had now recently, which just give that just heavy dose of nostalgia. Just kind of pump that straight back in the veins, and that's a powerful tool. That would I like to see that? Yeah, I guess. I mean, for me, my ideal would be we go CV. I know it's risky, and this is, and as you said, it's super risky. I mean, I don't know how the hell they pull off that story. I imagine you'd have to just go back to the drawing board with it, and just either
probably
just totally just re-envision it. I guess you could still have the brother being nuts, and I just don't know how you'd. I mean, do people say the story for Psycho like as if that's? Does anyone ever complain about that being a bit controversial?
Not that I know of. And that's actually a really good point. I would assume Psycho not being very culturally relevant right now plays into that, though. I would assume if you give people, the sort of people who are prone to getting a lot of their attention and fulfillment through feigning absolute offense over everything that takes place on the internet and in media, if you give them an opportunity to watch Psycho, I imagine that's the conclusion they're going to come to. But I think, the original Code Veronica, nobody has, so far, I haven't heard anybody come and be like, actually, that's a little offensive to me for this X, Y, and Z reason. But having Capcom release it as a brand new product, I think would thrust it into the public sphere, and that's what would bring it on.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be mean, but I don't feel like a lot of these people are genuinely offended at much of anything. I think if more than anything, we've sort of created an internet culture where we assign value to people based on how extremely upset they are about whatever thing is happening right now. And you're almost guaranteed attention, either negative or positive, from people if you speak out on subjects like that. And while you do have people who are legitimately trying to, change things for good, you have the majority of people, let's say on Twitter, who are just like, I see this and I've heard this argument, therefore that's how it is. And then a bunch of people are like, yes, very good, very good. And, that's what they live off of, that dopamine hit. I assume whatever they would put out would not genuinely be offensive to even people who are affected by those kind of things, because it's a fictional story and they're obviously not saying anything about you as a person. The same way when we have bald villains that have beards, I'm not like, oh, come on. There are people who are bald who have beards and who are also evil, and that doesn't necessarily mean I'm lumped in with that either.
Yeah, I totally get you. It'd be interesting. I think if they could redo CV, no matter what kind of way they have to do that to make it work and to fit, a modern audience, modern taste, then that would be my dream. But if that wasn't possible, then I don't see why we don't start with the start and we go straight to RE0. And we do RE0, and then we could do RE01, so we can then start building up the Wesker side of it before then we get into CV and we get to see where he came from. Because at the moment, people who, say for example, they've just played RE2 Remake, RE3 Remake, and say 4 Remake, they'll have seen this Wesker dude pop up at the end and think, who's this guy? What's he going to do with this Las Plagas this Las Plagas thing? They don't know who he is.
That's a good point.
So they kind of won't know that he's got all his superpowers and done all his Matrix-esque running in Code Veronica, and that he's been stabbed through the chest in RE1 and all this stuff. So maybe it's time to go back to 0, and I know as much as you love that game, that could definitely do with a touch-up.
Well, listen, even though I love it, I can totally agree with you that there are things that need to be tweaked in 0. Like, I find that to be the hardest mainline entry in the Resident Evil series by a country mile. Like, that's a tough game, and it's not tough 100% in a satisfying, they did this on purpose way. I mean, what are those things called? The executors? The little monkey guys that jump around?
Oh, God.
They're the worst, because even they'll eat a shotgun blast to the face, and before you are able to recover from firing the shotgun, they can hit you twice. That's not good game design. That's not good. You can't do that. That's really messed up. And in a remake, I assume you could place a few more green herbs maybe, because I feel like that game has the least amount of them in any game. There's definitely a lot that could be improved on RE0, and just because I like it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good game.
For me, the thing that always I just couldn't believe it was that goddamn hook shot. Every time I thought I was done with it, right? And I just kind of cleared a path. I figured out where I was going. Anything that could get in the way that was a real threat, I dealt with. Everything else hadn't been. I'd separated all my items out. It was all in nice little places. And then I'd get to the next thing. It's like, oh, how are we going to get up there? And I think, oh no, I left it miles away. And then running back, and then I'd have like the occasional enemy spawn in certain places. And I was like, what's going on? Yeah. Change that up. Add an item box. And perfect game. That's all it needs. A nice item box. Oh man,
I really liked how limiting it is to not have an item box, and to have to not only keep track of where you drop stuff on the map, but I actually super get into the swapping items between Rebecca and Billy. I don't know, something. I get why people don't like it for sure, but I'm like one of those guys who I'll spend a lot of time in RE4 organizing my inventory so it's nice looking.
Oh yeah, I'm that guy.
So I'm used to tedium. And I like the limitations that I think. So my opinion is, I was just talking about this on stream today. My opinion of Resident Evil style difficulty is not, well, I hit the button at the right time, because Resident Evil is sort of less around executing complex commands very efficiently. It's more about planning and strategy, memorization, puzzle solving. It's really flexing your mind more than your hand-eye coordination. And I think part of that is keeping your inventory stocked enough that you're ready to take on the next threat, but also not so stocked that you can't pick up items along the way that might be puzzle items or things that you have to keep with you. And I feel like RE0 is a really nice evolution of that difficulty model, where it's like, okay, you're used to having to maintain your inventory. You have to maintain 2 inventories, and now you don't have the item box. I see why that annoys some people, but my first gut reaction when I started interacting with this system was like, oh, neat. And ever since then, I just can't see it as anything other than like, this is honestly kind of cool. I get why they never went back to it. It's not intuitive, and it's not user-friendly per se. But, I play like the Stalker series, which is the least user-friendly game franchise of all time. Actively working against the player at all times. I might have an issue with video games, I'm coming to realize in this conversation.
I think they could do quite a lot with Zero Mind. If they did bring that back. I mean, the puzzles in Zero are a real highlight in terms of the overall series. The way that works with the 2 characters controlling them both and moving them around to be able to solve puzzles was excellent, so good. I suppose the big question would be, if they redid Zero, would they do it co-op? Because I imagine it would be an easy thing for them to do, and I think unfortunately it would ruin the game. I think if they did do that.
I think you're right.
But I could see they would do it.
Yeah, I mean, it would be, honestly, looking at how much money they made off of RE5 and 6, keeping in mind that while 6 reviewed really poorly, it was the second best selling game in the franchise, and it was one of the better selling games Capcom had ever released before. So let's say I'm a bean counter in the financial area of Capcom. If I have any sway whatsoever, a game that so easily would fit into a multiplayer mold, I would be yelling at people for not doing that immediately. So you're probably right, and you're definitely right that it would ruin a lot of the game, I think. Yeah,
it would. It would totally rob so much out of what makes it so unique to play. Yeah. And instead you'd be playing like a kind of half-assed version of RE1, really, with just 2 of you. I mean, I was only just playing... for review at the moment, I'm playing Dead Space 3, and I haven't played Dead Space 3 since it first came out, and I remember I didn't like it back then, and I'm really not enjoying it this time. Co-op in horror games can work, and it can work really, really well, but unfortunately, I can't remember the last time it has worked really, really well. It's a hard thing to do, to be able to create that atmosphere where both of you don't want to proceed, or both of you are like scared for each other, and I don't know. Like you say, Resident Evil to me is very much the same as you when it comes to decision making and kind of pre-planning is what makes it so effective, and that's what makes it so good. And if both of you were kind of a bit nonchalant because you got each other there to watch each other's backs, it kind of takes away from that to a certain extent, because you can pick up from each other's. If someone drops the ball a little bit and they haven't been prepping too much, haven't been planning too much, or they don't have the right things, the other person can cover their arse. Whereas when you're on your own, that's it. It's just you, and you've fucked up. Oh, I don't know.
Well, the cool thing about RE0's having 2 characters that you control simultaneously, essentially, is while it does help the difficulty in a lot of ways, it makes the game a little harder too, because in the middle of a firefight, I can't keep Rebecca from getting bit by a zombie other than just constantly shooting. So if I'm reloading my shotgun, Rebecca's about to get bit, I might have to switch to Rebecca, backdash out of the way, whatever, right? Like just back up a few steps, switch back to Billy. By that time, he's done reloading a shotgun or something. It sort of makes things a little more mechanically complex, but in a way that doesn't make the game feel like Devil May Cry and I've just executed like a jump cancel and like a 30-hit combo. It's more like, this was very difficult, and while it's nice having a second gun to put zombies down, which I think it's so fun. Like I remember in RE2 when Ada joined up with you in the sewers and you're shooting at zombies, my mind being like, I know what Resident Evil is. My concept of Resident Evil is I am alone. I'm running through these hallways. I'm shooting at zombies. There's a second person here with me. Mind blown. RE0 is the only other game that really gave me that same feeling. And it is nice having that. But then at the same time, I have 2 health pools I have to look out for now. The amount of healing items I can give to one person is effectively cut in half. So yeah, it does a lot to make... on the surface, you would assume 2 guns, everything's better, but it's like, no, it's not quite like that. And it's actually, like I said, sort of the Resident Evil brand difficulty done right, where it's not about being the best at controlling your character or something. It's about going in with good planning, keeping spacing in mind. You know what I mean? Like, okay, in a Resident Evil game, I have to remember, it's like, remember, you only have 6 rounds in your Beretta right now. If you get to 5 shots on this, you're going to have to go to your menu real quick. Now you have to double that. You have to keep track of 2 people's ammo pools. Damn, the more I talk about it, the more I'm becoming a fan of RE0.
I can tell. You're getting a bit too into this RE0 talk. I should have really used this as a way to be able to save you from RE0. To maybe help you see the light a little bit. But here we are. You're digging a trench. So never mind. I failed a little bit, but never mind. Maybe it's gonna rub off on me. Maybe I'll replay it in a few years' time, and I'll be like, he was onto something. That Jared was onto something. Oh dear. But yeah, that would be my hope, is that we'd start all the way back with 0, and then if we're gonna get 1, like you say, why the hell not at this point? I've for ages I've been fighting against the remake of 1, but you said it so well, and I can't really fight against it, to be honest, that the remake's there already, and it's perfect as is, so I could just go back and play that. So, even if it is terrible, it is what it is. It's, it doesn't have to be my version of RE1, does it, I suppose? But yeah, I'd like to see it go along that 0, 1, then Code Veronica, I suppose, for the remake wise, because 5 and 6, I don't even know how the hell you go about doing that. I was getting into this.
Same here.
My comment section the other day were asking, on my RE4 review, they were asking about, like, what could they do with 5 remake? How would you go about bringing that back? And I think, well, I don't know. Like, for me, I think, right, you have to drop co-op. But then, can you drop co-op? It was so important to the base game. But then, is that one of the reasons why the base game didn't work so well, in terms of it being, it wasn't really scary in any way? Is that one of the reasons or not? I'm not sure. Is it just because of the fact that there was just bosses dropped out of nowhere with no kind of build up or anything like that? It's just that there's enemies everywhere and they go down pretty easy, and you're just overpowered and you're comboing people. There's lots of different elements that you could probably strip out and put like RE4 kind of gameplay onto it, and it'd probably make it quite good. But I don't know. I mean, do you think that if you're looking at RE5, and if we did kind of go that way into remake territory, do you think they'd have to keep the co-op, or do you think that they could get rid of it? I mean, this is a tricky one. Purely conjecture as well.
Right. Coming from somebody who can critique game design, but not necessarily create it quite as much, I would say probably yes, you could make an RE5 that is single player only, that manages to feel relatively true to the gameplay experience that you got from RE5. But imagine you work at Capcom. Do you want to be the guy to go to someone and be like, listen, we are going to make a massive change to one of the best-selling video games Capcom has ever released in its history as a video game company? Ah, man. I'm not 100% that idea flies very well, because I feel like adding the knife parry mechanic in RE4 made sense because it was an addition and not a subtraction.
Yeah.
Like with RE4, they had a controversy because there were a few areas in the game that were left out. And looking at RE4, it's still tens of hours. You know what I mean? Like, you're massive. At the very least, you spend 10 to 15, somewhere in that neighborhood, hours on it. It's as long as my first playthrough of RE4 is. So the stuff that they subtracted clearly was made up for in one way or another. at least as far as my opinion goes. But imagine you're going to take away like a base gameplay feature from a game that sold so well. It probably brought Capcom back into being able to make Resident Evil games at a AAA level continuously. I don't know, man. I don't see that going over very well. And I don't see it going over very well with the fans, despite me agreeing it's probably the best move.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? And I suppose it comes down to what people want with remakes. And this is always a kind of beauty's in the eye of the beholder kind of thing. Because for some people, I know that you're one of these, Jared, where it's a case of you want it to be a case of the remake keeps as much intact the original game as possible, and then creates additives to it. Think of like Dead Space remake or Resident Evil 1 remake, right? Those are like perfect prime examples of that. And that's probably why they're the best two remakes ever made, in my opinion. And then the other side of the coin is you can have people take a different vision on it, and they could just re-envision it a different way. Say like RE3 is to RE3, or RE2 remake is to RE2. Those kind of things. For me personally, I'm kind of in the middle with all this. I don't mind. Don't mind how they go about it in any way. I just feel like it's got to fill a need, kind of thing. Like for RE5, does it really need to be remade? No, not really. Is it clunky to play? Yeah, it was clunky at the time. It's still real different now. It's exactly the same as it was. You know, it runs exactly the same. You can play it in like HD graphics now. Excella still is wobbling about with her massive boobs knocking about everywhere, and you're watching Wesker. Oh yeah, we love all that. And then you just got Wesker just shouting Chris left, right, and center. It was a great time, right? Fun time. Does it need to be remade? No, probably not. But I'd like going through and saying, right, well, let's just re-envision some of these ones where it took Resident Evil off into like a totally, down a path which it had to be reset. Even if they did make us stacks and stacks of cash in the back end before years ago, times have changed and people won't be happy for that now. That kind of experience wouldn't get us that kind of sales anymore. People want something different from it. And maybe we need to re-envision it and get it so it's a little bit spookier, get a little bit scarier. Kind of like 4's done with its kind of re-envisioning of this. But co-op, like you say, I don't know. It's a tough call to make. And I certainly wouldn't want to be the guy that has to go and say to the Capcom bigwigs, oh yeah, we're gonna pull the key cornerstone of what made this game. Yeah, so
exactly.
That's a tricky one.
Yeah, but I feel like people probably had a similar reaction to finding out that QuickTime events weren't necessarily going to play a massive role in RE4 remake. So maybe the fan base is a little more ready for change than I'm giving them credit for, but that definitely is dicey territory for sure. I will say I would imagine they would make more changes than not with a Resident Evil 5 remake, just because that's sort of the trajectory that the remakes are on. They started with RE2 remake, and it's just sort of something that is mechanically, visually, and sometimes narratively distinctly separate from the original that released. And at first, my idea was, if you're going to make a RE2 remake, it's a very important game. Remake it like you did with RE1. Be accurate. Add things. I want to play RE2 again. I don't want to play someone's interpretation of RE2 fed through the filter of, a modern gamer who has never had to put a memory card into a console before, right? But after playing RE2 Remake and seeing how well it works, I think there is a future for this style of remake in RE, because, we do have the originals. Sadly, not everybody has modern day access to like the original RE1, 2, and 3. That's something they could definitely fix. But those games are just incredible, right? So I have them at my house, so I'm not too worried about them changing things. But I am kind of stoked on the idea of getting a different perspective on the series. And that's something I wasn't as open to until I saw it working really well with RE2, sort of with RE3, definitely with RE4. So I would assume they would continue that, changing more things than they leave alone. sort of position. And in doing so, because RE5 did have a lot of fans, that might be rough, but judging from my comment section, the RE5 support pool is a little smaller than it used to be. So maybe it wouldn't be too bad now that I think about it.
Do you want to know where they've all gone? They've all gone to RE6. I don't know what it is, right? I did a review. I did a review for RE6 about 2 years ago now, when I was originally going through the mainline series. And for some reason, with this recent spike of Resident Evil with RE4, everyone's just gone to watch RE6 for some reason always did really well on my channel. I was like, why? I was just absolutely slating it for like 40 minutes, sitting there. It was terrible. And then all of a sudden, it's had like 60-odd thousand views over the last like 2 weeks. And all it is just the RE6 Defense Force have just flooded it. Just everyone telling me how wrong I am about how this is great. Oh, what a great game. So misunderstood. And I'm like, did we play the same thing? Like, this game is tragic. Absolutely tragic.
You know, I think I have a theory on that, I think. Because when RE6 first came out, we were sort of in a place as far as like games media, like games critiquing media goes. We were in a place where it was mega valuable. Like it was really profitable to shit on games. Like it, you know, Yahtzee from Zero Punctuation, Angry Video Game Nerd. We had sort of built up a culture of being incredibly critical and sometimes like disingenuously critical of video games. Because to say something like sucked skunk anus through a hose or something, whatever like crazy way you could find to word it, the dumber the better, that got views hard. And I think that sort of emphasized RE6's obvious faults a little more than before. And as time has passed, if you go on YouTube right now and do a search for RE6 good, you're going to find video essay after video essay of how RE6 is better than we thought, which is probably true because everybody said that RE6 was like irredeemable garbage at first. And there is elements of RE6 that is irredeemable garbage. But I think you can also have fun with RE6 once you figure out like the roll, the stun mechanic, the movements and stuff, like how you interact with it. I can't even play it with the keyboard and mouse, which I usually play third-person shooters with, because the movement just works so well with the D-pad and being able to dive to the ground, roll on the ground, shoot from... There are elements that could work had they have been put in a game that was also made well. RE6 was not. But I could play like 3 missions from Leon's campaign and 4 from Chris's and a bunch from Jake's, right? And have fun with them. But like as a video game that I have to play from start to finish, RE6 is very lacking. But I think people have overcorrected now. And it's become the people who were like mine, who had never played RE6 before, telling everyone how bad RE6 was because they had watched a review of it. Also watched a review recently or within the last 4 years of someone going, which I have done, by the way. I'm not innocent of this because I actually do enjoy aspects of RE6. It's still a bad game and it's still a bad Resident Evil game. I don't think there's any argument there. But coming from someone who didn't play RE6 until sort of relatively recently, I had more fun than I thought I would based strictly on, because all I got were reviews. And everybody said, like, I assumed this game was going to set me on fire as soon as I started playing it. You know, that was my level of expectation. So you take the people who were easily influenced by the negative reviews. I think probably culturally, as far as games media goes, we have transitioned into the opposite, where it's not as profitable to be incredibly like hard on video games now. And it's become a little more, well, you know, here's the good, here's the bad. You decide what you want. A little less of the screaming heads. And that being the case, people are seeing that and going like, oh, wait, no, RE6 is the best game. This is the best game. And it's like, neither of these are true. It's a really poorly made game that has mechanics that were definitely not, they were not seen for what they were, because there was a bunch of people who just hated the game. And fair enough, for the people who hate the game, you probably should hate RE6. But there's parts of it that 100% work. You got to put them into a good game, though.
It's wild. It's wild. They are, the people who adore this game are alive and kicking. And it makes me think that no matter how bad a game actually is, you know, even if you put out the biggest turd of a game, somebody out there will love it, and they will fight tooth and nail for it. Because it's like a war section going on in the comments for my RE6 review at the moment. You've got just two distinct camps. You've got people that just absolutely hate it and people that love it. And they just go into war. And it's just wild.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely insane. You think, right, well, you can't ever make any assumption of, oh, this is universally loved or hated, because turns out that even the one that's, you know, regarded as the one that like pretty much killed the franchise and, you know, ended it to a certain extent, it's still apparently people adored it. So who knows?
Isn't it kind of fun, though, getting to see things move and like ebb and sway with the winds of gaming opinions? It's kind of interesting to track that.
It's wild. I'd tell you what is even more interesting with that, though, is having your own evidence for your own opinion as well. Because, oh my God, I had, when I did my RE6 review, I had Facebook memories from like the time that I first played RE6. And a Facebook memory came up, and it was like from like 13 years ago or whatever. And I was like, at the time, I think I included this in the review, but it was something like, I posted out something like, I don't know why everyone hates RE6. I absolutely love it. I can't get enough of this. The critics are wrong, right? And then literally then like a week later, after I finished the final campaign, I was like, thank God that game ended, right? Like I started off loving it and then hated it by the end because it just didn't end. And and I started off when I played 6 through for review. I played Leon's campaign. I was like, oh my God, this game is actually really fun. I was like, that was great. And then by the time I did the final 2, I was like, oh God, it just doesn't end, this game.
Yeah.
So long. But, oh dear. Well, we can get into RE6 another time. But I suppose the final thing, Jared, before we bring this conversation to a close, as we kind of covered here, there, and everywhere, I suppose that the final thing really is that when it comes to RE9, do we want to continue on with Rose's story, or do we want to see it just go completely separate away from Ethan's kind of lineage, Ethan's kind of line, and go more so closer to, say, Chris Redfield, maybe a bit of Jill Valentine, kind of the more classic style of characters? Where would you ideally want it to go?
I mean, ideally, I would sort of want it to move away from the Winters bloodline. I think I was one of the few people who really enjoyed RE7 for both the fact that it stayed so far away from Resident Evil narrative elements, and then towards the end got way closer to Resident Evil narrative elements. I really enjoyed that. I liked the sort of juxtaposition, because I'm playing this game, it felt like a standalone title that could have happened in any other narrative universe, and then towards the end we start having a bio pharmaceutical company that's playing with things they couldn't contain, and there was an outbreak of stuff. I really enjoyed that. And then RE8 happened, and which RE8 was essentially like a sci-fi movie, like a made-for-TV science fiction movie, which I enjoy. Again, I enjoyed the gameplay in 8, and I thought it worked well enough for what it was. But this is Resident Evil we're talking about, and while Resident Evil has been insane, I don't think Resident Evil has ever been more insane than a man with the power of magnetism fighting his odd, like, rusted metal mecha formation with a mecha of our own, with a chainsaw and a machine gun attached to it. Like, as someone who critiques the more insane elements of modern Resident Evil, I can honestly say it's never done anything like that before. And we're sliding further and further into the not, because I mean, technically Resident Evil is sci-fi, it is science fiction. There isn't a viral compound out there that like revives dead people into zombies. But the idea of like a pharmaceutical company doing illegal experiments and then trying to burn everything to cover that up so they could save their own asses, I feel like it sits way easier with my suspension of disbelief than, you know, Rose Winters has fungus powers and goes into the fungus universe, the memory of the fungus, in order to see the spirit of her dad, which we can't confirm whether or not he truly indeed existed in that moment, or if it was a memory of the fungus or a memory of Ethan's. She now has psychic powers. You know, like even Resident Evil Revelations 2 with Barry's side character. What was her name?
Oh, Natalia? Was it
little girl.
Natalia? Was that her name?
I think it was Natalia. Even with that, it was very downplayed. I could sort of sense when these things are around, right? Like, if we did something like that with the new Resident Evil game, you know, fair play. It's a little too sci-fi for me, but you're really doing a lot to make sure that I don't have to swallow a big pill here. You know, RE9, I assume, to answer your question in the most roundabout way, I assume what they're going to do is continue Rose's story. That's probably what they should do as far as capping off a story. As far as what I want, I would love to see them try something new. We did first person. Maybe they've got a new idea for something. Maybe we sort of create a numbered Resident Evil game based around the hybrid style of RE2 Remake, which I think worked phenomenally well. You have RE4's camera angle with the happy medium between RE2's very slow-paced exploration-based gameplay, slow-building horror, and then RE4's sort of action-packed, more action horror thing. We've got a pretty good happy medium between the two in RE2 Remake, and ever since that game released, all I've been saying to everybody is, man, I'd love to see a Resident Evil 9 that plays like RE2. You know, go back to having a sort of relatively small, isolating location that a player has to move their way through in this perspective, with like an emphasis on walking through the darkness with a flashlight. Like, resources are sort of limited, but not so much that you could call it like this is true, real deal survival horror. It's more like, yeah, I remember something similar to this. This, you know, this activates all the survival horror stuff in my brain. Good enough for me. I think we could see a really good Resident Evil game come from that. But I feel like Capcom has sort of narratively locked themselves into, we couldn't make, you know, RE9 and not have it be first person. I would assume that's what they're thinking, because we have 1, 2, 3 with the fixed perspective, 4, 5, 6 with the over-the-shoulder perspective, 7, 8, 9. Then we did get the DLC for the over-the-shoulder. That could go either way, but I think we're probably going to continue with the Ethan Winters Bloodline story. We'll probably cap that off with 9. Maybe 10 we'll see something crazy radically different, but I would imagine we're sticking within that realm.
Yeah, I got to agree with you. I think it's definitely going to go down Rose's story and kind of continue along that. I don't know how the hell they'll do it, though. Absolutely no idea. I imagine it would be first person. I know a lot of people don't like it being first person, and they feel that it's, you know, it goes against Resident Evil, it being in first person. But ever since I played 7, I just really haven't felt like that. I just don't feel it makes any difference. I think it depends on the gameplay itself rather than the camera angle, right? And so I don't mind that. The big question is just how they use these goddamn fungus ass powers or not, right? And I don't want to be playing like Alice in the Resident Evil movies, you know, like where you're able to just blast people and throw them around the place and all this bollocks. I don't want any of that stuff. So God knows how they're going to do it, unless they just have her go mental, and then you're there to take her out. Maybe as Chris. Maybe it's the case that, you know, Mia is like, oh, my daughter, she's finally snapped, Chris. What you were worried about, she's finally snapped, and now she's a trained BOW. And he's like, right, well, one last mission. Time for one last hurrah. Puts a stogie in.
Right.
And he just calls up all the A-teams like, Barry, I know you're like 86 now at this point. Let's get you on. Let's get you on the wheelchair, mate, and get you out here. Jill, she still looks in her 30s for some reason. Thanks to
of course.
Yeah, but let's get you out here, Jill, even though you're 72. And let's go kill some BOWs one last time. I don't know. But we'll have to wait and see. I imagine we got, like we said at the start of this, we got another year at least before we see a headlight into that. Right, Jared, well, we've gone through quite a lot when it comes to Resident Evil, but I think it's time to bring this to a close. Audience, where do you want to see Resident Evil go in the future? Let us know in the comments section. And for Jared, where can people find you if they don't know already?
I make YouTube videos, Avalanche Reviews on YouTube, and I use Twitter to post pictures of my Japanese neighborhood and cats that I come across at Avalanche Jared, Jared.
Excellent stuff. Well, it's been an absolute joy and a privilege having you along. Thank you ever so much, Jared. I really appreciate your time, appreciate you coming along and your expertise.
Absolutely, man. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Been a blast. All right, mate. Thank you ever so much. Well, audience, thank you ever so much for listening. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. See ya.